Alien 3 was not a flop. Against a budget of approximately $50 million, 20 more for marketing, then take the theater's cut, the $155 million worldwide gross likely gave a profit of between $5 and $20 million, plus home video. However, compared against Alien's $60 million in profits against a budget of under $20 million, and the original Alien of around $75 million against a budget of around $10, Alien 3 was not the return on investment Fox had hoped for. Far from being a tentpole, it was more of a leaky tent. The question now was, how do we salvage this? Clearly the Alien franchise was still valuable if even a critical savaging, public backlash, and diminished receipts still couldn't stop it from making money. They just needed to decide where they went from here. The first thought was, what if we say Alien 3 was all just a dream? Just back up and create the sequel to Aliens that the audience had wanted in the first place instead of the one that they got. It is, however, recognized as desperation, most famously done by the show Dallas after a disastrous season made them realize they needed to pretend all of that just never happened. The dream cop-out is like Cary Elwes cutting off his foot in Saw, a very messy and damaging way out of your predicament. And yet the alternative seemed hopeless. We killed off every character the audience had any connection with. Perhaps taking up the hacksaw was the only viable path forward. At 20th Century Fox, an executive was gaining clout with a string of success that he'd helped shepherd through production. His name was Jorge Saralegui, who had accelerated up the ranks from a novelist to a Fox script reader and making big waves when he brought in the Keanu Reeves-Sandra Bullock hit Speed, followed quickly by Independence Day and Die Hard with a Vengeance. As he continued to rise, he pushed for capitalizing on Fox's IP, namely a second Speed film and obviously a new Alien film. Knowing that Weaver had insisted on Ripley's death, he pushed for a continuation without Ripley. Instead, they should bring back a different character, Newt. Knowing that her death had upset many of the franchise's fans, bringing her back would fill the gap that Ripley's departure created while providing a satisfying connection to the beloved character. The idea was that she would be cloned and an adult now, but still have her skills in history with the aliens to call upon. The one that Saralegui thought could best pull off this trick was Joss Whedon, whose success with the film Buffy the Vampire Slayer made him ideal for writing a young adult female action star. In 1994, Whedon began a 30-page treatment, cloning Newt into a Buffy-like character with special skills and talents against a specific adversary, just xenomorphs rather than vampires. Newt would lead a team of space marines on an operation to obtain samples of the creature from Whedon-Yutani, who had cloned her a few years after her death due to her monster maze skills of surviving the aliens, to serve as a guide for their operatives. Newt would be distrusted for her unnatural origin, but her story was of humanity coming through and her determination to finish wiping out the xenomorph threat for good. Coincidentally, Brandywine had mentioned to Weaver at the wrap party for Alien 3, after she lamented that maybe she had made a rash decision, that they could just pull some fingernails out of a drawer and clone Ripley if they wanted to. This time, Brandywine wasn't too keen on making another film, but Saralegui was insistent that the series had much untapped potential, especially with the fresh slate that Newt offered. Whedon was not just bringing them a female action star since their last picture had killed the only one they had off, but was upping the stakes. It was going to have an epic finale set on Earth, going big rather than remaining small and tight like the other three films had been. Alien 4 was going to set off in a bold new direction, except the studio got cold feet. Jorge Saralegui succeeded in convincing the rest of the Fox leadership to pursue a fourth Alien picture. The problem was the absence of Ripley. Alien was Weaver's first real film. She would always be synonymous with the series. The executives felt that they needed to have her in there. The problem was, though, Weaver didn't need Alien work. She had many acclaimed roles. Her career was just fine, and she was even starting to have fun with a sci-fi reputation. It'd be just 2 years after the fourth Alien film that she was in a sci-fi role that she fought hard to get, Gwen DeMarco in Galaxy Quest. She did so because she thought the idea was tremendously funny and the role sounded like fun. Which is the point. Fox felt Alien needed Weaver. Weaver didn't need Alien. She was looking for roles that appealed to her as a performer, not a need to see herself once again on a poster with a sci-fi machine gun. The decision was made. Come up with a script that brings back Ripley instead of Newt, and hopefully it would be appealing enough that Weaver would want to come back and do it. Cloning her instead of Newt was the obvious solution, though Whedon wasn't thrilled with losing everything he'd done with Newt, which was what appealed to him so much about writing the script. Still, he took it on and introduced a change to make it more appealing to himself. Have the reincarnated Ripley get her head and DNA a little scrambled. Don't just restore her, well, wrong. Acid in her blood, enhanced strength, sensing things that she couldn't before. The Fox team loved the idea of Ripley 8, as she was the 8th cloning attempt, and it provided a new direction for the film. The question of how human was she, how trustworthy was she? Whedon put together a script around this, and it was sent to Weaver, who was pleased. She loved that this Ripley had an error. It gave her away, like with the possessed Dana Barrett in Ghostbusters, that she could do something really different, something that she could explore, a stranger in her own skin. That was how she described the idea. David Leong, a fight choreographer for the theater, would be hired to be Weaver's movement coach, to help Weaver have alien animal-like movements at times. She agreed to play the role for the co-producer credit again, an $11 million salary, as noted in release, more than the entire budget for the original Alien. And one other thing. No Pinewood. She didn't want to spend the winter in London making this movie. She wanted it shot in Hollywood this time. Fox agreed. This time they'd be shooting in America. And yet, they would actually turn to Europe for a key part of making Alien 4. It was early 1996 when they went searching for a director. Trainspotting had just come out, and its director, Danny Boyle, was in high demand. Boyle was interested and met with the visual effects team, but quickly got cold feet. He was afraid that making a work this effects-intensive was something that he just wasn't ready for yet. He backed down and went on to make A Life Less Ordinary instead. Peter Jackson, who again would go on to create the Lord of the Rings film epics, was approached thanks to his success with Heavenly Creatures, but he wasn't excited about the idea of doing an Alien sequel and passed. Bryan Singer, whose critical and box office hit with The Usual Suspects had come out the year before, was approached, but ultimately he went on to other projects, though he did return to Fox soon after to do their first superhero film, X-Men. Among the others that are rumored to have been approached was David Cronenberg, who has established panned the original, but I haven't found anything to verify whether or not he was actually officially offered it. It was a very radical choice then to approach Jean-Pierre Jeunet, as he had never done a Hollywood-style big picture before. In fact, he'd never even made an English-language film before. But his 1991 black comedy Delicatessen and his more recent The City of Lost Children showed a talent that they thought could bring something unique to an Alien film. The series had been all about seeing potential in directors who would go on to greatness. Scott's generation-defining Thelma and Louise. Cameron was working on finishing up Titanic. Fincher with his shocking film Seven. They thought Jeunet would fit right in with that pedigree. Jeunet wasn't sure if this was right for him. He thought the last film had pretty definitively closed the door. But the idea of bringing his surreal style and black comedy approach to Alien was just too tempting to resist. So he agreed to the project and brought over several of his reliable crew members to California. Having apparently learned their lesson from Alien 3, Fox supported Jeunet in his desire to make the film more his own. They weren't entirely hands-off, but they definitely were offering a bit more freedom than they did with Fincher. If Alien was a haunted house, Aliens the horror of war, and Alien 3 dark nihilism, Alien Resurrection, as Whedon had now titled it, was to be a funhouse ride. Jeunet brought in his unique sensibilities and visual gags, such as Ripley making a basket while looking the other way. Weaver loved that idea so much, Rather than effects, she insisted on getting actual practice under the guidance of an NBA coach. After 2 weeks' practice on the day, she sunk the shot on the first attempt. So shocking that the take almost was ruined when her co-star responded out of character in amazement. The painful part was the shot was framed on the assumption that it would need to be faked, so that it appears to be a camera trick. No, Weaver insisted publicly, she made the shot for real. The question was whether the film itself could look just as effortless when completed. To play the secondary lead Call, eventually revealed as an android, the filmmakers turned to Winona Ryder. Ryder was flying high in the 90s as a young female star, and Fox wanted that extra star power for what was seen as a way to jumpstart the series after the loss of goodwill with Alien 3. Ryder, a self-professed Alien fan, was thrilled by the offer and accepted the part without even reading the script. She said she didn't care if she died in the first scene as long as she could be in an Alien movie. Her enthusiasm stemmed partly from her childhood admiration for the series. When she was 10, she first saw Ripley, the first true female action hero that she'd seen, and admired her. She felt Weaver was one of the great female role models of film. In fact, she was afraid at first that she was going to have to replace Weaver's character in a post-Ripley franchise. As established, Weaver is very tall, something that would be put to great effect in Alien Resurrection. Given Ripley 8's enhancements, it gave her a greater sense of her physical power. Winona Ryder, on the other hand, is 5'4". She couldn't fill the role of this icon. She was excited to learn that she would be sharing the screen with an actress she idolized, not having to try to fill her shoes. For the mercenary crew, Jeunet tapped Ron Perlman, whom he worked with on The City of Lost Children, who makes clear his role in the crew. I mostly just hurt people. Jeunet also brought in a longtime collaborator, Dominique Pinon, as Brice, the wheelchair-bound mechanic. It was a brave choice. Pinon was unknown in Hollywood and spoke limited English, but he had Jeunet's confidence. And again, after the Alien 3 debacle, Fox was avoiding micromanaging, so they left that up to him. The role of the mercenary Christie, with his twin guns, was actually written by Whedon for Chow Yun-fat, bringing his Hong Kong cred to make Christie a larger-than-life figure. It's why the character takes a prominent role in the group when they realize they need to escape to the Betty. Unfortunately, Chow's representative dismissed the role out of hand, so it instead went to up-and-coming actor Gary Durdan, who would later go on to play a prominent role in the original CSI. Michael Wincott played the Betty's captain, slated to die first in order to leave the band of mercenaries leaderless. For the military side, J.E. Freeman and Brad Dourif played the two lead scientists, a point we'll get back to. Raymond Cruz played the soldier DeStefano, who joins the mercenaries during the escape. The actor was known for similar roles in film, and of course, would later play the iconic Tuco Salamanca on Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul. Veteran supporting actor Dan Hedaya, notable as being skilled in both wry comedy and in drama, was cast as General Perez, overseeing this operation. It was his idea that Perez would pull away a piece of his own brain after an alien punctured his skull, looking at the tissue before collapsing. Leland Orser, who coincidentally had just appeared in the aforementioned Seven in a small role, played the colonist infected with a chest burster. The only interference by Fox in casting was that Jeunet wanted the lead scientist to be female. Fox had concerns that with Weaver and Ryder already, a female villain would be a bad idea, hence the casting of Freeman, known for his thug roles, which telegraphed early on that he was the villain, while Dourif established that he'd be the unhinged scientist. The choice not to make the character female came from numerous considerations. Maintaining broad appeal was certainly one of them. But given the treatment of the villain, it could be, problematic for such blatant violence to be directed towards a woman, no matter how evil she was, especially given the gruesome end the character has, having the alien inside Orser's colonist exit through his chest and through the villain's forehead. Not to mention the violent near violation of Ripley by a gang of prisoners in the last film meant that violence directed against women was something they probably had to be very sensitive about. There was plenty of ugliness planned for the film already. What the story brought was what William Gibson had wanted to explore: mutant varieties of aliens. They were not the same as the ones that we had seen before, thanks to the way that their queen had been recreated. The degree of this is open to interpretation. Perhaps what's most striking as far as the rank and file ones go is when they turn on one of their own in the cage. That they would think to do that, of course, is not surprising. Aliens had demonstrated between the cutting the power and the queen understanding the elevator that the aliens possess some kind of intelligence. Even the first film, despite having killed Lambert and Parker, the alien does not bring them to the nest to use their bodies, but gets aboard the shuttle as it understood that the ship was going to be destroyed. So concluding that their own acid blood could be exploited as a way out is perfectly fitting with their established characters. What is notable, however, is that the two turn on a third, and the only one that we've ever seen act afraid, suggesting that they turned on it for being weak, a consequence of impurity. Purely speculative, of course, but there were other signs of change to these aliens. During the escape, the humans must swim through a flooded kitchen, where the aliens pursue them in a form that's far more adapted to aquatics than it was before. This, incidentally, was a very difficult part of the film to shoot. The performers had to all learn how to perform their underwater scenes safely for the parts that couldn't be done with stunt stand-ins. Winona Ryder had a panic attack. Turns out that she nearly drowned as a child and had avoided the water ever since. Ron Perlman surfaced too quickly and hit his head so hard on a sprinkler he was knocked unconscious and had to be rescued by the crew before he drowned. Of course, the biggest change to the aliens was how the alien queen, after laying eggs, further mutated to develop a womb and was able to produce an offspring without the need of a host, only for this offspring to then turn on her and seemingly imprint on Ripley. Jeunet wanted the newborn, as it was called, to appear eerily humanoid, even considering giving it human-like eyes and a mix of male and female genitalia. That wound up being removed in post-production when it was seen to be too disturbing even for this film. It was realized by 9 puppeteers. Tom Rothman at Fox felt that they needed practical effects rather than CGI in order to keep the monsters tangible and real like they had been in the first 2 films. The alien in the third film had drawn some criticism for its occasional stop-motion animation appearance, so they were trying to get back to the suited version that was so successful in the first 2 films. Who was noticeably absent was Brandywine, who this time took a far more hands-off role. While they still were all listed as producers, it seemed like the day-to-day was being handled by Bill Battalato, the executive producer of Top Gun, who had just recently produced Saraleghi's action film Broken Arrow. What makes this especially surprising is that the Alien series is pretty much all that Brandywine was doing together, collectively. They would each individually produce other films, but Alien and inexplicably a sub-hour film called She Walks were all that Brandywine had done. Once Alien came along, I mean. However, we should also take note of the fact that all the Alien sequels, including spin-offs such as Prometheus, are being credited to Brandywine. This despite the fact that Walter Hill is the only one of the 3 founders who is still alive, and he's retired from filmmaking. This likely means that while 20th Century Fox owned the IP, Brandywine, as the originating studio, has a profit-sharing or percentage ownership of it, so their involvement was business rather than creative on Resurrection. Besides, it seemed that there was enough creative strain on the film already. Joss Whedon and Jean-Pierre Jeunet did not get along. They had fundamental disagreements on the film in many of its aspects, up until the end and beyond. Whedon had poured a lot into the Newt storyline, had to scrap it, and then conceived of an approach to the story that convinced Weaver that it was worth coming back to play Ripley. He thought he'd made a great script that was going to make a great movie. With Fox willing to indulge Jeunet, the director spent 2 months storyboarding and rewriting scenes to infuse the film with his signature arty style, emphasizing visual flair and oddity over straightforward action. Despite Whedon's script being what had excited her, Weaver declared, "You're my hero," to Jeunet for the way he would rework the script. Whedon was resentful that of all the time he put in, that Jeunet was ruining his film. Today, Whedon is largely a discredited figure, so it is easy to cast the hero and the villain in this exchange. In fairness, though, if you think about lines being delivered wrong or being changed in some fundamental way, it can be understandable. Let's consider for a moment if we took some classic lines from the Alien series and changed who said them and how they might have said it. The game is over, man. The game is over. I say now, get away from her, you bitch. This is Ripley, the only one left. Going to sleep now. I say we nuke the entire site from orbit. It's the only way to be sure. While obviously this is exaggerated, you can see what separates an intended line from an inferior tweak or delivery of it. Whedon felt that Jeunet was essentially doing that with all of the lines that he'd sweated over for the movie. The fact that the film was less than a hit and his name was the one being credited with dialogue that he felt was inferior really bothered him. The newborn was designed by Whedon as an alien with spider-like legs and pincers. Jeunet instead went with a more humanoid hermaphroditic creature with a connection to Ripley intended to be disturbing in its sexuality, especially given American Puritanism, Jeunet had said. Whedon said, I don't remember writing a withered granny-looking pumpkin head kind of thing makes out with Ripley. Pretty sure that stage direction never existed in any of my drafts. Whedon also disliked that Jeunet cast character actors known for playing bad or disturbed roles, as it removed all the ambiguity from it. It was going to be impossible for Brad Dourif not to say his lines and sound like a mad scientist to the audience. The result was a film Whedon vehemently disavows, that it was the lowest point of his career, and added, they cast it wrong, and they designed it wrong, and they scored it wrong, they did everything wrong that they could possibly do, resulting in a film he called unwatchable. Jeunet remained silent in response until the 25th anniversary of the film's release, when he delivered a creative insult. He insisted that, had it been Whedon who had directed instead of himself, the film would have been a huge success. Because Whedon knew how to make highly marketable comic book slop without artistic merit to be enjoyed by morons. Essentially, his view was, sorry I ruined your lowest common denominator blockbuster by trying to give it a whiff of artistic merit. Still, it wasn't the conflict between creatives that mattered. In the end, it was what the critics and the audiences had to say about it. It wasn't terribly reassuring. Like Alien 3, Resurrection was not a flop. While it made less than Alien 3 domestically, it earned more internationally, so finished about the same. While it cost more than Alien 3, it still likely emerged in the black. The reviews were somewhat kinder than it had been for Alien 3, but much of that was for Weaver's performance. Whedon took a lot of flack, perhaps the root of his animosity over the film, considering how much it deviated from what he'd written, and he was getting the blame. What likely helped keep the film profitable in the end was excising a planned ending with the aliens on Earth. It was cut for being too expensive, and there's nothing to indicate that its presence in this film would have changed the film's success. Besides which, the reason that it was justified as being cut was that it was so big that's what we should save for Alien 5, the Aliens on Earth plot. A treatment was even put together by Whedon, but his experience with Resurrection led him to walk away from Alien Revelation, as it was called. After he left, the big rumor was that a return to the aliens' planet of origin was being planned. Weaver said she found the idea intriguing. But time passed, and when the turn of the millennium came, no plans for the fifth Alien film were in place at all. It wouldn't be for a couple more years, but Ridley Scott publicly spoke about his interest in returning to continue the series after all these years, perhaps exploring the origin of the space jockey like he'd wanted to originally do for Alien 2. He expressed his disdain for 3 and Resurrection, commenting that Alien should have been up there with the likes of Star Trek and Star Wars as a franchise, but it was being consistently mishandled. He wasn't a lone voice. Another joined it. Someone else with a history with the series, James Cameron. After his record-shattering Titanic had succeeded, Cameron had withdrawn to a degree, but he spoke with Scott. He had a proposal. How about if I write and produce Alien 5 and you direct it? They agreed in principle on it, and one of those principles seemed to be that it would not be a continuation. In fact, desperation be damned, there was consideration to do the All Just a Dream to disregard the last two films. But rather than simply saying it was all just a dream, to have them be visions of a possible future that had Ripley fearful that she might indeed be carrying a queen within her. Whether it would be on Earth or the planet of origin was also being considered. Cameron was hoping that perhaps he could get Arnold Schwarzenegger to come in and play a colonial marine. It was clear, though, whatever came next, Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection were being seen as failures, though. That trying to get Resurrection to pay respect to what Alien 3 did was sunk cost fallacy in action. They needed to go for a bold new direction of some kind. What they wound up doing was something that Cameron and Weaver, upon hearing about it, both regarded as a mistake that exceeded all that the last two had done put together. An entirely different way of approaching what an alien film could be.